All right, we are live, man. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Yes.
All
How's
right.
life in how's long is sunny California? You just got back from there.
I just drove home yesterday. It's a
Yeah.
blazingly fast drive home time of 10 hours and 30 minutes.
Blazingly fast. Is that
Yeesh.
a long way? How far is it from your
I don't know the mileage, but usually it's 12 hours. So, yeah, we went
quite
well. We
serious?
went well. So, we didn't have to stop in snow or anything like that. So, but it was a great trip. We had a good time in California.
Yeah,
So,
sounds fun.
speaking of California, I just looked at our podcast stats, and we are, of course, the number one e-commerce podcast on Spotify, which is no small feat. You
It
have to
isn't
use the
actually, no.
dash, and it is the desktop version. I kid. It might actually be on the mobile version as well, and you might not have to use the dash. I don't know. But anyway, all that to say, I just saw that California is our number one location for podcast listenership in the United States. That's pretty awesome, man.
It is. I mean, I think I guess the skeptical statistician in me would say is the biggest state by population.
So, yeah,
On the other hand, there are a lot of educated people there, and of course, it's the home of a lot of major tech companies. So, I think it's a great place to have
yes,
people. I've had clients based in California, and certainly quite a few of my guests for the amazing FBA and 10K Collective podcast have been based in California, and sharp people they are. And also, I think I love that can-do attitude you get in California. It's a nice contrast to my British skepticism. They kind of bounce off the walls slightly sometimes, but it's good fun. I like it.
I lived there, grew up there, and then we lived there for 4 years while I was the executive director of a nonprofit in the Bay Area. And I can tell you one thing about Californians,
Mm.
man, those guys are commuting like I was going to say commuting fools because I was one of them, but they're commuting. I mean, they're hardcore, man. My
Yeah.
commute was an hour and a half each way when I
Hmm.
lived in the Bay Area, and yeah, so there's a lot of commuters, and
Yeah.
so that's just the reality of it there. Yeah,
Similar in London, to be honest. I mean, look, Britain's weird because we have London, which is a similar size to LA or New York or Chicago, I guess, slightly larger, and
yeah,
then there's the rest of Britain. I think like the nearest big city to that is Birmingham with 3 or 4 million people, or Birmingham as you would call it,
yeah,
and then the rest is just kind of tiny places relative to American-sized cities. So,
yeah.
but in London, a lot of the same things apply as you get in New
Sure.
York or LA. It's just kind of 2 hour commute each way, which is
Yeah,
standard. And quite a lot of people, if you work in the city of London, which is a very specific thing with a capital C, doesn't mean London. It means that there's literally a square mile, and that is where the financial district is. It's a bit like Wall Street,
oh,
and those guys often start at 7 in the morning and get out of the office at 7 at night. So those
yeah,
guys often leave the home at 5, 6 a.m.,
yeah.
get back 9, 10 p.m. Pretty grim life.
You guys have a train system that's, I don't know if it's better than the U.S., but I can tell you this: it feels more sophisticated to ride on the train system in Britain than it does in the US. For some reason, it feels a little bit more like, I don't know, has some cachet or for some reason. I'm not sure why. But
Well, I guess
anyway,
it depends. Yeah, it depends whether you have to use it every single day of your life, doesn't it?
okay.
I
Yes.
guess there is a certain cachet because it's very expensive. So if you can afford to ride the trains, it means you've got a certain level of income, I guess. But
Yeah.
yeah, I mean,
It's fun.
yeah, it's not like trekking from New York to LA or somewhere, I guess.
Yeah. Well, people are popping in here. Welcome, welcome. If you're listening to our live version of this podcast recording, we're grateful to have you join us live. Of course, we're just messing around for a few minutes before we kick off the podcast formally. But leave us a comment. Let us know where you're listening from. Rada said hello from the USA. All right, hello. And so let us know where you're dialing in from. Give us a like or love or comment. If you're watching on Facebook, if you're watching on YouTube, of course, love to have you subscribe to our channels. That'd be fantastic.
From
And of
Boston,
course, yeah, and
which
from
is supposed to be
Boston.
quite a European city, as I understand. But I mean, I guess it depends to whose
There
eyes
you
you're
go.
seeing it. It's supposed to be a beautiful place.
Mm. Well, are you ready to kick off today's amazing topic, man?
I am. I do think it's a good topic. Like a lot of this stuff, I'm really happy that we're doing all these first principles based things, particularly the microeconomic stuff. I think there's
Mm-hmm.
just so much wisdom. The
Yeah,
lovely thing about this stuff is this, that there's a few simple concepts that if grasped really thoroughly can really change everything. And I'm a real massive believer in that because I've seen it happen a couple of times in the
yeah,
businesses I work with. So
yeah.
this is cool. Yeah,
Love it.
let's bring it
Okay.
on.
Well, today's topic is 5 ways to find your total addressable market. We're going to do a deep dive, excuse me, a deep dive into total addressable market. I've got a list of 9 questions you can ask yourself to try to figure out what your situation is with your
Excellent.
total addressable market, and then 5 ways to find your ideal customers.
Sounds great.
So that's going to be a good one. And I think we'll have a great time with it today. If you're watching with us live on any of the platforms and you want to have questions that we connect with, feel free to leave them as a comment underneath the either Facebook group or Facebook page that you're watching on, or under YouTube. Any of those are fine. We'll see the comments here in our back-end StreamYard tool, and happy to weave those in. Yeah. Okay, so let's kick it off. Michael, you ready? I'm going to do the intro.
Let's do this thing. Yeah.
Okay. Here we are. A total addressable market is the total number of people who can buy your product or your type of product. But how do you find them? How do you know how large the audience is? Are there shortcuts to finding them? Are there hazards to avoid as you do this type of work? Well, in this episode, we're going to break down all of those topics, give you tips and ideas for how to get after this idea of finding and serving your total addressable market. Michael, I'm really excited about this conversation because I get the feeling that a lot of people need to do this work, but don't actually have tools available to them to do it. And I feel like this might be a good little toolbox for people to use. What's your perspective? Is the idea of clarifying and going after total addressable market and serving it something that you hear people talking about in your small group, in your mastermind, or is this sort of skipped over?
Interesting question. I think it's under discussed really, and it's kind of discussed, but it's implicit in the way people use tools. For example, if you're using Ahrefs for Google SEO for your own store direct to consumer, or Helium 10 or the other tools like that for Amazon sellers. But I think people rely on tools and the tools give them a number, but they're not really conceptualizing what is this number and what is it really telling me. For example, Helium 10's Chrome extension will give you the total revenue for positions 1 to 60 on Amazon in response to a certain keyword. And that feels like an accurate and precise total addressable market number. But what is it you're actually doing? That revenue, for example, is based, even though it's in response to a keyword search, is actually a summary of the product-based revenue. So there's immediately a problem because, okay, what is it you're actually measuring? Well, it's kind of a weird blend of two things. Whereas really for private label or custom product development, you need to know the value of a niche driven by a cluster of keywords. So one of the things we've got to do, I think, and we can do today, I hope, is to clarify conceptually what is it we're trying to measure? What is it we're getting out of this? And it's a very real question that I'm about to do a bit of product research for one of my European-based clients who's selling on a European marketplace, but not on Amazon yet. And I'm going to have a look on Amazon.de, the German version. And this is exactly the sort of question we're trying to clarify because he's given me a list of criteria and I'm like, okay, what is it we're asking? One of the implicit questions is what's the total addressable market? So really important question to address.
Love it. Yeah, great stuff. All right, well, let's get into it then. I do have a list of 9 related questions to go over. Are we ready to jump into the list, or what do you think?
Yeah, let's do it. So what's your first question?
Yeah. First question is it an uncommitted or a switchable total addressable market? And the idea here is that it really doesn't matter so much what the total addressable market is. It really matters actually what the market is that you can win for yourself. And so you have to find out whether this is a group of people that are out there that are unserved and you can serve them, or whether they're committed already to an existing brand. And that's one of the first questions I like to think about is kind of what is the status of the marketplace you're trying to enter or operate in. And I think this question of a switchable TAM is a good first starting question. And because in the absence of understanding what's happening in the marketplace, the numbers will not help you. Like just a number doesn't answer the question, can is it switchable or not? Just at the top level. So that's kind of my first thought, first question is begin to really ask yourself the question, is it a committed group of people to another brand or set of brands, or are they yours for the taking, if you will?
Yeah, great question. And it's a classic, I totally agree that this is an important question. Classic newbie error is to get excited about total market revenue. And all that matters really is how much you can win for your own brand and win profitably. Because if you win market share on Amazon by spending a ton of money on ads, which is the classic thing you do, and reduce your price, then that's no use either. The more subtle error that people make is to get into a market where a certain percentage of people will switch and some won't, but the ones who switch are not very desirable because they switch for price reasons, and that's actually on Amazon. Even quite established sellers fall into that, and then even worse, they know it, but they fall into the trap of keeping going because I've got to just have that product selling. It's what are they just called, a brand awareness or whatever they use as a way of saying I'm making sales with almost no profits, or tying up inventory, money into inventory for 12 months. So yeah, it's more pervasive than you might immediately think.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts about this? What's the solution to this?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it's a great question, and I think it's a discovery process. I mean, whether there's a specific silver bullet solution, I'm not sure, but I think you're constantly in a discovery mode about your addressable market and the value proposition that they bring to you as a business, and the value proposition you bring to them with your product or service. Is kind of how I look at it. Yeah.
Absolute sense, yeah. So discovery, yeah, I think you're right. It's not a one and done thing, and that's another newbie area. You're right. It's more sophisticated to say, yeah, we're finding out. So, what's the second question then? After that,
This is an interesting one. The second question is it a fractured total addressable market, or is it a fractal total addressable market? Now, a fractal is something that's the exact same, kind of pattern or size or symbol or concept in multiple places all over, the internet. And so the question behind this question is, are you going to find pockets of your addressable market in one or two specific amazing places? In that case, it would be a fractured total addressable market, and there's these groupings of people. Or is it a fractal situation where there's the same percentage of customers on every marketplace you look at? So, for example, think of a product on Amazon where you would say, well, there's as a percentage of all Amazon sales, this product is going to do like, 0.5%, and that equals, 50,000 transactions a month. And you go to Walmart.com, and as it happens, there's a huge number of customers on Walmart for that product as well. And then you go to eBay, and there's a huge number of customers on eBay for that product. And you go to Wayfair, same thing. And you go to on and on, all the marketplaces. That's a fractal situation. And really, an omni-channel strategy is appropriate for a fractal situation, because it means that you can go find your ideal customers, your addressable customers, on every marketplace. In addition to your own website. But there are some products and some systems, some services or products or product suites that just frankly don't exist on some of the marketplaces. And so that's a really, really important question. And it's important because I started our business on our own website because I literally could not, by the terms of service, sell my product on Amazon or eBay. They didn't allow it. So I had to answer this question, like what is happening here? So I think that's important to think through: fractal versus fractured. What are your thoughts on that one?
Yeah, it's a very important point. I guess you're talking about, in simple terms, where is your market and how easy it is to address them in one place. And I guess there's always an implication that the very specific keyword searches brings up a very unified market. And actually, you're right that it's not always the case. Sometimes they are all on Amazon and none on everywhere else. And sometimes they're spread all over the place. I guess I would say also that the other thing to think about is in terms of market selection, whether you want to go after a very fractured market, because it does make life much more complex. And if you're dealing with physical product inventory as opposed to, in your case, with the digital products, that means the distribution becomes a nightmare quite quickly, especially if you're dealing with a market as big as if you're selling across the USA, which most marketplaces would call the US, Amazon.com or eBay.com US, whatever. That's a huge physical area to serve. And if you're then also having to send things into warehouses or based on multiple channels, doesn't mean one shouldn't do it, but I would always say that it's good to be very, very aware of the downsides and the costs and the complications before you enter into a situation like that.
Yeah, love it. Great.
So number 3, what's the third thing?
Number 3 is, what's the total addressable market versus the market you've already served, or the portion of the market you've already served. And the portion of the market you've already served falls into 2 categories. People that are happily buying from you and will continue to, or people who you served and they've walked away from you. And it's really, really important to understand that second part, because if you do a ton of marketing, but you can't keep customers bonded to you, it's like the back door of whatever the metaphor is, the back door of the bus or the back door of the train is open and people keep falling off the back. And so this whole idea of whether you can serve, part of the market and really connect with them, or whether it's a churn where you're just constantly trying to get them to buy and then they do, and then they never come back. Understanding that as in relation to the total addressable market, I think is a critical thing to think through.
Interesting. I mean, I guess that's related not so much just to market selection or market sizing as really the quality of the product or the relationship between your products and the audience. I guess you could have a quality product in the sense of manufacturing quality is very good, but it doesn't really, the way you marketed it means it keeps ending up in the hands of consumers for whom it doesn't really solve the problems. And on the alternatively, if you're just really great at marketing and getting that right, then I suppose those are the sorts of things that I would think of when you're talking about happy versus unhappy or repeat customers. The other thing I think is really worth saying is this, that particularly for Amazon sellers out there listening to this, there is now, even within the Amazon universe, the subscribe and save option. I was talking to a guy for the podcast a couple of days ago for the 10K Collective podcast who buys Amazon businesses, and he's not huge level aggregator. So he's got a bit more of a nuanced kind of tailored, boutique way of selecting businesses. They buy about one a month. So they're a bit more selective. And he's saying, the subscription model is really important. There's also lots of books out there. Is it Manilow's The Automatic Customer that talks about the value of that, the MRR, monthly recurring revenue. So I think this ability to keep people happy and have some element of recurring is really, really, really important. It may not look that dramatic on your profit and loss, but the multiple of that profit as a percentage of the business value is going to be like 5-10x as opposed to 3x for an Amazon business, for example.
Yeah, I love those ideas, and you're right. The monthly recurring revenue is valuable to think about. The Shopify systems allow now for a buy and save recurring subscription program product as well. So that's easily achieved through Shopify. I'll tell you the reason this question is important. The worst scenario to be in is in a really small niche market and have a product that doesn't serve the customer that well and be a really good marketer. Because what you'll do is you'll expose your entire total addressable market to your product. They will have seen what you are offering and will have decided you're not the answer in their life. And then what do? It's like, then you have a real problem. So understanding, this relation to the people you've served, the people you haven't served, and how happy they are is critical, to think through. So the marketers should beware when they think through whether they should be advertising, promoting, marketing their product or not to a small niche.
Yeah, that's a really great reality check. And here's what I would say, again, with the Amazon selling scene is utterly obsessed with marketing hacks, and it's gradually growing up. But I would say this. The most important thing is to have a fantastic product development process that really checks at a really tiny scale first whether people are really happy with the product, who it's really for rather than who you think it's for. And again, look, it's a discovery process, but I would rather discover it with 10 people than 10,000. And the trouble with Amazon is it scales so quickly, you can scale up a terrible product very fast, and then you've done exactly what you said, and you've cooked your goose, because Amazon is great at SEO. So if people Google your product and there are terrible Amazon reviews, they're going to find that very easily. So you're 100% right. And I think it's really important to go in stages and to circle back round to ever refine your product development. As a flip side of marketing, you're right, because great marketing and terrible product is a total disaster. And you're absolutely right. By the way, that's like the classic Amazon private label launch #1. That's like exactly what you just said. Mediocre product, lots and lots of marketing dollars. I wouldn't say great marketing, but effective getting exposure, really good reviews, everything dies. But you're totally right on that one. Well, look, really, really great stuff so far. Now, the next one, number 4, this is a really critical question as well. What's this question?
The fourth question is really sort of out of the forward to my new book, Ecommerce Power. And the question is it an undominated niche? And then question number 5, this follow-on question would be, or is it a dominated niche? you really, really need to think through whether it's a total addressable market that's under the spell of an amazing product. And if that's the case, if there's someone who's won the day, you really want to think about what you're doing. Or is it a situation where there is no dominant service provider or product? And in that context, you have to ask yourself the question, why? Is there a reason why there's no dominant niche player, or is it just an opportunity? And so understanding that is really critical. You don't want to be in a situation where you think there's gold, but it turns out to be fool's gold. And so understanding what dominant players exist. Is it a monopoly situation? Is it a duopoly where there's a big one and a second big one, and those two dominate, or not? I think that's a critical question to ask. Yeah.
Absolutely agree. I mean, really, one of the most sacred principles there is out there that I've seen so massively justified by Amazon sellers. So I say it's such a driver is the star principle, which is very old school, goes back to the 1960s, but it is really a question of how dominant your product can be. And I really think it's critical to, if you can, just go for non-dominated niches. But as you said, is it fool's gold? So you got to look at whether it's worth having. But I think if a market is dominated by a leader, first of all, there are two problems with it. First of all, you're going to have to knock them off the top spot if it's a small niche, or you're going to have to position yourself very, very strongly against them. But here's the thing. If you're positioning your trainers against Nike, for example, then Nike kind of controls that. If Nike decides to move the goalpost and you're positioning against their goalpost, they control that. So that's one risk.
That's right.
The other thing is that, so for example, if you think Nike, used to have allegedly, I'm not saying this is true on the podcast, use sweatshops. Now, if there's a perception of that and you're absolutely the opposite and deeply moral and organic and renewable and everything else good, fantastic. But you're still kind of positioning against that. And if those guys sort that out and make that part of their marketing, then you've lost that edge. The other thing is this, that going into a market dominated by somebody means you're only really going to have great value in that market if you're after a particular type of keyword or particular type of need, if you can beat them. And it's quite rare to beat somebody who's very established because they have a kind of little flywheel that keeps them up at the top, as we've discussed already. They've got a moat around it already. And a lot of people are very, very optimistic about their ability to outmarket some pretty major players. So yeah, I agree that you've got to be really cautious with that.
It is a weird dynamic to think through, because you definitely don't want to be tilting windmills and trying to go after a market that's really dominated by someone successfully. And to your point, I think in summation of what you just described is the old saying, it's easier to play defense than it is to play offense in this type of situation. In marketing warfare, Al Reese and Jack Trout, the defensive player is so much more well suited, because to your point, if a competitor says we're green and they're not, well, 2 weeks later, you can say, well, we're green too. And by the way, no one's heard of those guys. And we have all the other benefits of being the top leader, and now we're green.
Yeah.
And so it's so much easier to play defense, I think, is a key part of this. Yeah,
absolutely. And for example, I mean, there are a lot of players, because my mum's obsessed with environmental type stuff and always has been. Yeah. So my parents invested in an organic farm back in the 1980s, which was just ahead of the trend, and that's why it died. Yeah. If they did it now, they'd die because people like Tesco's or Asda or whatever, and in America, Walmart or whoever it is, are very invested in that now, and it's become part of normal culture, and they've got the supply chain to do it cheaper, and they've got the marketing dollars to make more of a noise about it. So I wouldn't really want to be in either of those extremes. Somewhere in the early-ish days, you could carve something out and become Whole Foods. At some point later, then Amazon takes over Whole Foods, and that was kind of an obvious play. So there are certain sort of times in the development of a market where it's a great idea to try and get in there. Yeah. Sometimes it's too early and there's no demand. As you said, is it fractured for a reason? Like nobody's really making any money. And then sometimes like that game's been played. So I think it is about the trend and where you step into that trend that's really critical as well.
Yeah, I totally agree. And then on the other side of it, to say, is it an undominated niche, and you have an opportunity? I do think there are tons and tons of small niches that are not dominated currently, and that are waiting for someone to bring what you might call a professional approach to the market. And I think the question there is, what you're looking for is a community of market participants who are loyal to their topic. They're loyal to their, they're faithfully, consuming, buying, using, participating. They have informal networks and groups or events or whatever, and no one has taken them seriously. I think that's the thing to look for, is a group of people who, frankly, they have the energy, and it's the marketers or the product sellers who have said, oh, well, that's just XYZ. That's just too small or whatever. I mean, I think that's the opportunity, is to look for an undominated niche. And most of the time it will be undominated because larger marketers have dismissed it because it's too small. I think the biggest mistake a small marketer can make is try to step into a large niche that has sophisticated marketers in it. You're stepping into a red ocean. But I think if you'll look for the blue lagoons, the little, the small little opportunities that the big boys or big gals, you know what I mean, the big marketers would say, no, we're not going to serve that market. It's just too small. There's not enough people there. So we're going to avoid that one. And then you can say, wait, that sounds great to me. I'll step in. Yeah.
Totally agree with that. Well, two things. I mean, the obvious point is that you and Cinnamon absolutely have done that with, the sewing community, particularly the dolls clothes sewing community, which is so specific and niche. It sounds still absurd to say it to me, even though I know I've seen your example. The other thing to say, though, is this: if people are suspicious, like, oh, but doesn't that just mean that the big boys or gals are going to just enter that market? Well, no, it's a bit like, is a cruise liner going to come and dock at this tiny local port? It can't. And Warren Buffett, for example, has articulated, even 10, 20 years ago, the problem he has with Berkshire Hathaway is that they have to invest such huge tranches of money, $1 billion, $5 billion here, that they cannot invest in the wonderful companies such that they used to invest in, because they can't park enough capital there. They end up buying Coca-Cola shares or whatever, because when you're trying to invest $5 billion, you need various things, I suppose, including the fact that you won't completely distort the market by buying 5% of the shares.
Well, so, the reason is because if they invest in those small marketplaces, and even if they double or triple or quadruple the sales, it just doesn't add up enough to move their needle on their top line revenue numbers. It doesn't get them where they need to be as a company in terms of their own growth goals. And so I think it is frequently a mistake to overlook a small niche opportunity and try to say, oh, I need to find a big total addressable market. I would say to anybody listening to this conversation, you actually are hunting for the smallest possible total addressable market that have some of these characteristics we're talking about, rather than saying, is it big enough? You should say, is it too big? I think is the idea. Yeah.
Love it. How small can it be? I mean, if you're trying to create a living for yourself and one family, initially, I mean, once you've got your foot in the door, you can then expand outwards, which is a whole other question, right? But yeah, you're right. I mean, how small can it be and still work is a beautiful question. I like that. I really like that. And by the way, that's not a question I ever hear Amazon sellers talking about. They've been trained by Amazon to think big, which means expand quickly and make Amazon a lot of money, or at least a lot of sales.
Or serve a lot of customers, which is what Amazon's goal is, of course.
Exactly, yeah. So we've been well trained to serve Amazon's goals, precisely right. And yes, you're right. How small can be is a wonderful question. I'm a believer by that Swiss saying, small is beautiful. I love small businesses that are well run.
Yep.
So I guess we're touching on your position, sort of question 6 here, aren't we, really? What's this 6th question?
Yeah, number 6 and number 7, again, are kind of corollaries. The number 6 is it a loyal total addressable market? And number 7 is it not, or is it not a loyal total addressable market? And let me just mention a few factors here. Is it a loyal total addressable market? If that is true, if the customers will bond with your brand, then it will add value to your business over time. It will be accretive over time, and additional income, revenue, numbers of email subscribers, and total transactions, they all go up over time if your total addressable market is, in essence, willing to bond with you or be loyal to you. And this is very, very exciting if you're entering into an undominated niche, because it's setting you up for a home run. You've got customers who are willing to be loyal to a good product maker or service provider, or a brand, and you've got nobody dominating the niche. That setup is like green light all the way. go forward, step into it. But then again, if it's a loyal total addressable market and it's a dominated niche and you are not the person dominating it, then it's a real concern, because you say to yourself, wow, these people seem to be really loyal and they're not loyal to me. And I'm not sure I can switch them off of the Apple pop products, or, you know what I mean? Like there's a million examples. I can't get them to switch off of Tesla, if you're a car maker or whatever. And I think this is important to think through. Now, on the not loyal part, there could be plenty of reasons. Maybe it's a seasonal purchasing situation, where every Christmas they buy the same thing and they don't care who they get it from. Maybe they're price sensitive purchasers in this market that you're going to enter. And candidly, all they're looking for is the lowest price. And they don't care who provides it to them, because it's a commodity type item. Or third thing it could be is maybe they're just all convenience shoppers and they're just looking to have whatever they need. They don't care where they get it. They just want it ASAP. It's really about just, is it a convenience item to them? And loyalty is not really top of mind. And I think these are all questions to ask in this, in regard to this loyalty idea.
Yeah, this is great stuff. I really like this, because what's becoming clear to me, and this is a really, this is a way of looking at things that is really making me reassess this. So this is totally a conversation that all e-commerce sellers have to have, even startups, well, especially startups, because they spend their lives going, here, what am I going to sell?
Yeah.
It strikes me we want really three things. First of all, we want switchable, because if they're not going to switch, then it's a waste of time. So if you're trying to sell kitchen products in a totally dominated market, they're not going to leave Le Creuset, or some great brand, or Nike if you're selling trainers, for some other product, unless it's totally cheap. We want something ideally not dominated by somebody else, because then we don't have to fight to take market share off, and the risk that we don't even win enough market share to become the dominant player. And then the other thing is, I really like this distinction you draw on. We want people who are potentially loyal, but haven't got a brand ready to be loyal to yet. And then you can win their loyalty by serving them better than anyone else. Exactly like you've done with Pixie Fair, that you and Cinnamon have served a really passionate but underserved community, and you become the people that they're loyal to now. I would hate to go into that community, apart from my ignorance about it, and go and try and compete with you guys, because I'd be competing with a red wall of or a blue wall, whichever wall color it is, of people who go, no, we absolutely love Pixie Fair. We're not going to bother with VZ dresses, whatever it is. So I really love that clarification. This is great. So I know we've got 2 more questions left, and then 5 ways to find your TAM. So what are the 2 more questions that we should be asking?
Yeah, the 8th one is real quick, because we kind of touched on it already, and that is it a total addressable market that you can win from a competitor, or are you going to be the first person to serve them the first time that they've used a product of your type, or do you have to win them against from away from a competitor? I think that's an important question. And then I'll just do the 9th question real quick, which is, I think it's really critical to understand, is it a total addressable market that is shrinking and in decline? Are you trying to sell 8-track cassette tapes or DVDs? Or is it a total addressable market that is a hot trend and maybe too hot, like a fad? Or is it a slow burn, positive, the right direction? And this trend line of the total addressable market, I think, is super critical to understand. And here's the thing. It might be the case that a shrinking trend line, declining, is the reason why no marketers are serving the community. And it might be an opportunity, actually. So it's not as simple as just saying, oh, it's shrinking, I'm not going to participate. You have to ask the question, what is the real world dynamic going on in terms of other competitors? But understanding that trend line, I think, is really critical.
Yeah, I love that. As we were talking about before, that the whole trend thing, I think there is a moment where it's too early. And there is a moment where it's totally dominated by somebody else. And that, I think that's true for pretty much every trend. I was talking about organic stuff because it occurred because my parents have been obsessed with it for forever. But that's true for pretty much everything. And one of the things that happens online, but particularly on Amazon, even relative to Google, is that these things can happen in a matter of months. So it goes from a hot opportunity to over. One of the things, of course, is fidget spinners, which I confess that at some point I did consider, like everyone else, probably with my business partner at the time. We looked into it and went, instinctively with this is going to be over or something nasty is going to happen to regulation, and then the next thing you know, I think the Germans were banning a lot of people from importing it and actually selling it on Amazon at all as a category. So an awful lot of people end up with a container load of spinners. So that's an example of too hot. And I really like the fact that also, just because there's a dying market, really love that you can make a lot of money in a dying market. One of the richest people in Britain that I've ever heard of, try and remember his name, somebody Dennis, I'll look it up, but he became worth about $1 billion roughly, and most of his money was made in magazines, which even when he went into it was a dying industry, but my goodness, it took a long time to die, and it's still a place you could make money now. So that's a really great observation. I like that a lot.
Totally. No, I totally agree with that, and it's really important to understand the lay of the land. These are things that excuse me, these are things you just have to understand and stew in over time and really, think about, obsess over, research. You cannot enter a new market and understand any of these things on day one. You just can't. I mean, which is why, some of these choices and decisions have to be done methodically over time. And you learn these lessons through, hard work and understanding. And sometimes you realize after weeks or months or years of operating in a market, these ideas come to you and you're like, oh my gosh, this is the situation I'm in. I didn't realize it. I didn't realize that, these people were such dominant players and I couldn't switch the people away from them. I didn't realize that, so these things are slow to materialize in our minds and in our businesses. And I think all of us have to approach this with humility and say, of course, and this is, you mentioned, Pixie Fair stuff a few times. We obsess over this a lot. We have ways in which Pixie Fair does not work. We're understanding our market more and more all the time, even after 12 years. And but I think we all have to approach this with the degree of caution, humility, concern, maybe a little paranoia, and just really pay attention to it. Yeah. So.
Yeah, paranoid. There's that famous. I've been rereading some Jim Collins recently, and there's that phrase, "Only the paranoid survive." Wasn't that Michael Gove from what is it, Intel? I think so. Yeah, but I love this this last thought. I mean, we've got to look at the how-to in a minute, but just want to say, everything's a discovery process. That was your phrase, I think. I really love that. It's such a corrective to the idea that, ironically, on the Amazon platform, which is so developed through experiment, many of which fail, even for the great Jeff Bezos, that people try to go in, use a tool, and then get it right from the beginning, first time, and then put a lot of money into something when they have no experience, they don't know market. I think, as you said, the humility to know you're going to often get it wrong, and the willingness to experiment are two mindsets that are too rare, particularly amongst people who sell on Amazon, but just in general in business. I love that. Really, really important.
Yeah.
So let's talk about these 5 ways to find your TAM. We've covered the 9 questions about it. Really great questions, by the way. Love those. Let's talk about specific strategies and tactics to actually win them. So what are your thoughts on how we do that?
Sure. Yeah. I think the finding your TAM is just such a fun conversation to have. And it gets into the tactics and strategies of really what the methodologies we use is called the 9 mountains of traffic. So it's a methodological approach to, or a method to finding your ideal customers. And so I'll just mention, there's 5 things here that I think are critical. The first one is using search marketing. And that would both be organic and paid, the whole universe of, understanding where customers are coming from in terms of finding out information. Search marketing is, I think, the place to camp in a lot of ways. And of course, how you do that is SEO strategies, and it's also blog, tactics and getting rank for specific keywords. No silver bullet here, no secret tricks, no overnight success. But if you can identify the keywords that your total addressable market is using to find things in the market specifically, or just to discover the product at the first onset of their discovery process, then you've really got an opportunity. And, this comes down to just a very simple yet hard to achieve goal, which is have the top couple positions for every keyword that you want, and then advertise on top of that, so that when someone searches for a key phrase, they see your ad, and then when they look down to the organic search results, they see you, and then maybe they see a listicle for another blogger that has you as the top result in the second position, and maybe you're in the third position, completely dominating the organic keyword positions is the goal to achieve. And I think that a lot of us want to overlook it because it's hard. It's a simple plan, but hard to execute on.
Yeah.
And I think that's the first place to start to look for your total addressable market. Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. And the thing is, just because something's simple doesn't mean you shouldn't at least aim strategically to achieve it, even though it might, take years to develop the tactics to really effectively do it. I think if you start with that mentality and that objective, it's still, you're right. You've got to have the courage to set a really difficult objective, even if you're not quite sure how to achieve it, because if you don't even set the objective, then you're guaranteed to not achieve it.
Yeah.
I've got to reference Tommy Griffith here. So he used to be SEO, head of SEO for PayPal, and then for Airbnb. Let me try that sentence again. Tommy Griffith used to be head of SEO for PayPal and then for Airbnb. So really knows his stuff. He did say in the corporate environment, it's quite different from the scrappy entrepreneurs and startups that he now works with. He runs clickminded.com now. So he had a very interesting conversation with him on the 10K Collector podcast about this. So he said, for example, let's say you look at barbecue grill sets, which is a classic kind of e-commerce type play. First, he says you should lay out the total universe of related search terms. So to your point, and he says start by being thorough. Every variation, propane, non-propane, electric, large, small, industrial size, etc. And of course, if you work for Airbnb where they had 10 million pages or something ludicrous, you get used to the idea of thorough, meaning really thorough. And then he says, and this is an important distinction, I think, lay out the types of keywords and buckets into types of intent. In other words, are they high search intent, but low buying intent, or are they high buying intent? And I think particularly for anyone who's transitioning from Amazon to running their own store, you really got to wrap your head around the fact that on Amazon, it's a huge volume of search, but the bucket it falls into is mostly high search, high buying intent, and that actually there is still another universe of keywords on top of that. So if somebody puts barbecue grill, propane, large, maybe it's specific enough that they've educated themselves about the fact that you can use propane as a gas and it fires barbecues and you know what size you want. Maybe it's even got a brand name attached. They're quite likely to actually click and add it to cart and buy. So it's a small but critical distinction, I think, and that in itself is really important. Now, Tom is very analytical because he comes from a corporate sort of background, and so he's got a 6-part process for addressing TAM, and you and I discussed the fact that neither of us might actually do this in real life. But I think the first 3 is really important. Find the universe of keywords, captures on the spreadsheet, and then divide them into buckets depending on categories, but also how close are they to buying intent? Is it top of the funnel? Like, what is a barbecue grill? What is propane gas on your barbecue? Clearly not ready to buy yet, etc. The other 3 more numerically driven things are applying a conversion rate, applying a price point, and then if you multiply those 2, that gives you the possible revenue. Now, that's pretty majorly analytical. A couple of the nerdier people out there would be tempted. I'm kind of tempted, but I'd probably find it hard work. But that way of thinking, even in and of itself, I think the fact that you can get a rational answer to the question of what is TAM, even if it's wrong by a factor of 100, it's 100%. It still, I think, kind of puts a ground underneath this rather. This mindset which goes, oh goodness, it's an unknowable thing. Well, no, actually it is knowable. I mean, you and I may not be nerdy enough to calculate it precisely, but it is doable. And I think even that self, for me, feels like a reassuring thing. The other obvious thing to say, and this sounds kind of really stupidly obvious, but he said he repeatedly comes across people who don't do it, is before you order a container of something, please do this work. The math doesn't lie, as he put it.
Yeah. I think that's critical. Finding calculation methodologies. Here's another calculation methodology. If there's a large player in your space that serves a related customer, or that you have a product that's in association with what they do, and they're a public company, go look at their 10K, their filing information, their annual reports. You can find out if they're a $1 billion a year company and they're serving a customer that's slightly different than yours, but in essence, in the same industry. You can start to understand what the market opportunity is like just by kind of researching your competitors or the industry participants, I guess I should say. Okay, let's keep going. So
That's really good. Yeah.
yeah.
What's our second way?
The second way is find the affinity groups for the niche. Now, frequently those are on social media platforms together. Frequently they'll use hashtags. Frequently they'll be in things like in industry associations. They'll be in Facebook groups. There'll be a tribe that is coalesced together around something, someone, some community activist, participant, whoever, blogger, whatever it is, and you want to look for those affinity groups. Now, I will say this: I work with clients who that sell amazingly high volume that there is no affinity group for. So this is not a tried and true way to find a total addressable market, but frequently there are affinity groups for a niche or industry, and you definitely want to track them down, figure out how many members there are, who the leading participants are, all of those elements of finding the specific groups that might be in existence around your product idea. Yeah.
Yeah, this is great for the less kind of analytically minded, or
Yeah.
in fact, for those who are overly analytical, this is quite a good corrective. I really think this is so important. And particularly, again, we'll talk about TAM specifically, but it's kind of related to a question of, am I going to go into this market, yes or no? So to some degree, it's kind of a black and white question to a little, to simplify it down. And related to that is, how do I produce a product that's going to serve this market? Now, that is a different question, but I think what happens is people often go from a set of tools that are maybe rather limited on Amazon, certainly, and then they go straight, and the worst thing is go to Alibaba.com. I really no longer advise that. But the second worst thing is they go and find a product maker and they just get some stuff made without any further reference to the group and whether in fact there's any passion around it, because numbers show you one thing, but they don't really show you the level of pain people have around the problem. And I really push my clients now, if they're startups, and I try not to work with startups anymore because it's hard work, but when I do, I really push them to say, like, go and talk to people and find out whether people really, really care about having this problem solved. And I've had a couple of examples recently. One, fortunately, you talk to people and they say, yeah, all of the other products out there really mess this problem up. It's to do with the sort of kitchen equipment messing up a certain type of cooking. And then somebody else talks about stuff to do with homework and stuff, and nobody actually really cared about the problem. I said, okay, so you know what? I'm glad you had that conversation, and it's disappointing for you, but now we move on. And that's really important. And that wasn't anything to do with the numbers on Amazon. It's it's a kind of emotional driver. How painful is this to solve? So really, really like that. I think it's a great corrective to overly analytical thinking.
Yeah. Love it.
Great stuff.
Okay.
What's number 3?
A third thing that you can do to find your total addressable market is create what you might call a beacon. And a beacon, in my thinking, is an event that you run that draws your ideal customer or prospect to you. And there are 3 things that are top of mind, and we work with these with our clients all the time. First one is a contest, right? So do a contest, and this is really the backbone of our beacon type strategy. And the thing that's important to understand is search marketing would not help you in any way, shape, or form. And it's just completely different other universe of finding your total addressable market by running contests, because it's much more driven by word of mouth and social sharing and that kind of thing. Okay, so contests. You can run your own summit or conference. You could do your own challenge, and challenges are very, very popular right now for information marketers, but they could be applied to product marketers all day long. And so running your own event, I guess, is the third idea here, and creating that kind of signature activity where prospects would be like, oh, this company's doing something cool and I'm excited about it. I'm going to find out who they are and jump into it.
This is great. And by the way, it's a lot of people in the internet marketing world perceive that that's what info marketers do, and then product marketers, physical product marketers do other things, or fast moving consumer goods. Guess what? Apple is famous for its raving sort of events. I mean, 2 things, I guess. One is where Steve Jobs, particularly, who was a master at this stuff, ran their kind of latest announcement meetings. And the other one is queues of 50,000 early adopters out the doors. And they're geniuses at that. And I really think that what they've done is blended the idea of a new product with a product launch with an event. They're kind of seamlessly linked. An iPhone 12 it's kind of really almost feels like an excuse for an event these days. Do you know what I mean? I always did, and I think
Absolutely.
they are the geniuses at that.
Yeah, totally right. I hadn't thought of that as an example, but you're right. They do that brilliantly, and of course they're the most successful product marketer on the planet.
Yeah.
And that's a key part. And I hadn't thought about that, but they've had Macworld conference and those kinds of things forever.
Yeah.
And you're right. There you go. Yeah.
I don't think, by the way, they're a particularly extreme example, because I think somehow there's something about the cult of Steve Jobs which you may like or dislike, but you kind of can't ignore it. And I think really it's in the DNA of Apple to make events part of their, not just marketing, but part of the DNA of the emotional connection to the product. And that comes from the design passion as well. So I think it's both about product development and the flip side of it, the marketing. I think it's very, very built in together. I honestly think that, okay, it's an extreme example. It's over quoted, but I think that that's the right mentality for all of us. I mean, whether you do it through events or not is another thing. But yeah, I think it's, again, something that's underdone, and there's a great opportunity. It's kind of, it's just wide open, really, in the fast-moving consumer goods world. With most e-commerce operators I know, just do nothing like this.
Yeah, totally.
So this is great. So what about number 4? What's our fourth way of finding our TAM?
Number 4 is just the opposite. It would be events that you attend or participate in that you don't run, but it's still the idea of participating in events. You just don't have to run them, which is infinitely easier, of course. And this could be online, virtual, or digital type marketing activities, or it could be in real life. So, being on podcasts, being a speaker at virtual events or conferences, it would be online versions of this type of thing. Guest blogging, I guess you could even say, would be in essence an event. But in real life, you could also attend events such as trade shows, even things like your outdoor summer festivals, things like your farmers markets. It don't be like, there are a lot of really successful companies that started by going to the local farmers market and standing there all Saturday and selling to actual people and hearing their feedback and getting reality on what people are thinking about the product or not. So in real life events, I think, are a huge opportunity to start to find your total addressable market. Yeah.
Again, I think what you just suggest is another thing that seems to be coming up for me as a theme, which is it's not so much about marketing in the sense of getting more products out the door and selling them. Well, that's sales anyway. Well, it blends together, doesn't it? Or even awareness raising, but you're not raising prospects' awareness of you and your products, but raising your awareness of what prospects really want. And frankly, whether they really like your product. Because if you're at a show and somebody comes up and has a good moan to you about how your product isn't working, I'm sure you'd find that really unpleasant and wish it hadn't happened. But guess what? I'd 100 times rather that happened at a trade show with 4 or 5 people and that I went and corrected course and then got it out on Amazon, rather than I went on Amazon with 10,000 units and then discovered that everyone's giving me 1-star reviews and kills the product. So again, the value of negative feedback one-to-one out of the public gaze is not pleasant, but for the grown-up people, it's really powerful, I think.
Yeah. Obviously, attending events in real life for like trade shows kind of thing is also a huge opportunity if you're looking for like wholesale distribution, opportunities where you would sell through retailers, that kind of thing. So, I mean, I think depending on your product that you're offering, there are a lot of opportunities there beyond just direct-to-consumer sales. Networking within the industry, all of those kinds of things. Those are old school, but they completely and totally relate to e-commerce selling all day long. I just don't want us to gloss over those original and best, networking and marketing tactics, right?
Absolutely. No, and really the value, apart from feedback, I guess, the value of one really great relationship that you get from 2 or 3 days at a great trade show might dwarf everything else. So you're absolutely right.
For sure. Yep.
And what's number 5, the fifth and final?
Yeah, the 5th way to find your total addressable marketplace, total addressable market, is of course to explore the marketplaces that are available to you. And this has really become an omni-channel world. It used to be that eBay was the only game in town. And then, of course, Amazon came on. And then, of course, Etsy came on, and Walmart.com, and on and on and on. Now there's, I think something like over 200 viable marketplaces, large-scale marketplaces, according to Channel Advisor. And so, the opportunities to go find your ideal customers on a marketplace is an obvious, first place. But the question is, are they stuck into that marketplace as their source for, being served the product? And do you just become a component of that marketplace? Or is there an opportunity to find them on the marketplace and have them come to your own website? And this is the dance, of course, that all of us are focused on. And so I think, understanding where your customers are. We talked about it being fractal in nature or not at the beginning of the show. And if your total addressable market has tons of participants on every platform, lots of customers on all of the marketplaces, then it is wise for you to be an omni-channel seller. And I think understanding the marketplace dynamics is critical. Many people right now are focused on this idea of converting from Amazon to Shopify. That's been happening for the last 5 years. But now it's from Amazon to Walmart.com. And a lot of people are asking the question, is Walmart.com got the same customer base potentially for me as Amazon does? And some of our clients are finding that it actually does. Some of our clients are finding that Walmart will be as equivalent to, or even, potentially better than Amazon is for them, which is just remarkable. But, this is the question I think we all have to ask ourselves. And I think discovering where your total addressable market is in the marketplaces is a key idea. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, there's quite a few things where, in fact, there's a kind of halfway house. One of my guests recently, Ben Leonard, built and sold an Amazon business for 7 figures within about 2.5 years, which is kind of majorly overachieving. He's a really kosher guy, but you can see why. And one of the things he did was absolutely sell on Amazon, but he had a lot of web presence that built up the value and the brand and the excitement around the product, which is an interesting halfway house to be continued another time. But so just bringing this home a bit, first of all, how do you know if you're trying to serve a TAM that is just not going to coalesce around your brand? Because that is one of the $64,000 questions, isn't it, that keeps us up at night. How do you solve this problem?
I think you have to look at your data, and I don't think it's knowable in advance, really. If it's an undominated niche that you want to enter, you have to decide whether that's just a fortuitous opportunity or whether there's a systematic reason. And the data will tell you. You can look at for example, in Shopify, if you are selling on Shopify, you can look at your returning customer rate as one indicator. A low returning customer rate or visitor rate means that people will come and never come back, and new people might come, but they don't come back. And whereas, if you start to have a returning customer rate that's 40%, 50%, 60%, 70%, it means that you've got people who are finding you and commonly coming back second time, third time, fourth time, fifth time. That's a really, really green shoot. And so, I think the data will start to tell you the answer to this question, and it's hard work to figure it out.
Yeah, and like a lot of things you've been saying today, I guess a lot of it comes down to, number one, be humble enough to recognize it's going to take work and time. And the second thing is, I guess the market kind of tells you if you're willing to listen. So wonderful wisdom today. I really love this stuff. Can you summarize for us? There's quite a lot to take away. 9 questions and find time for 5. Let me try that again. So a lot to take away today. Can you summarize, Jason, the 9 questions and then 5 TAM finding methods for us?
Sure. In a quick recap, here are the 9 questions to ask yourself. Is it an uncommitted or switchable total addressable market? Number 2, is it a fractured or a fractal total addressable market? Number 3, what's the total addressable market that you've already served versus potentially can serve? And have they bonded to you or not? Number 4 is it a total addressable market that is niche Sorry, let me say that again. Number 4 is Number 4 is it a total addressable market that is dominated by a large player? Number 5 is it a total addressable market that is not dominated currently? Number 6 is it a loyal total addressable market? Or number 7, is it a not loyal total addressable market? Number 8 is it a total addressable market that you can win from a competitor? Or can you be the first person to serve them? Number 9 is it a total addressable market that is shrinking, that is stable, or that is a hot trend that is going to crater in the future. And the 5 ways you can find your total addressable market are: number 1, search marketing; number 2, affinity groups; number 3, events that you run; number 4, events that you attend; and number 5, through marketplaces. Wow. What a recap, huh?
That's, yeah, 9, a list of 9 and a list of 5. You surpassed yourself, sir, there in your listicles. There's tons of value here. I'd really urge anyone listening to this to go back and listen to it. I mean, this is Jason's list, not mine, so I can say that. There's a lot to absorb. It's like a couple of years' work at least, but there's a lot of value in here because a lot of this is just underused. Yeah, grossly underused, and therefore an opportunity. So final thing, Jason, you mentioned your book, Ecommerce Power. Can you just remind us who's it for and how do people get hold of it?
There it is. Yeah, awesome. Ecommerce Power is the new book. It's out on Amazon in Kindle and paperback, and love to have you pick up a copy. It's really a book designed from soup to nuts to understand how to find and serve a niche market with an ideal product and marketing strategies. And so it's good for all e-commerce operators. The brand new folks will find a ton of value in it. And I think the veteran folks will also find a ton of value in it. In fact, this whole idea of finding your niche market is actually a concept from the introduction of the book. Not even, it's not even a chapter in the book. We just cover that in the introduction. So I'd love to have you pick up a copy. If you've already gotten a copy, love to have you leave a review on Amazon. That would help me tremendously. And the audio book is coming out shortly as well. So if you're listening to this here in the future, by the time you hear it, I would assume the audio book will be out as well.
Great stuff. Yeah, and it is a wonderful book. Again, you have the knack, as you demonstrated today, for grasping very big concepts. And unlike somebody like myself that tends to then break it down into 1A and A 1.3 and everything else and blow everyone's minds, you have a knack for really picking out the essentials and helping people make sense of a very complex situation and making it simple. So great book to read. And as ever, fantastic discussion today. Really love that. There's lots and lots to take away and think about. So thank you so much. And we're done.
Good times.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're done. Hey, great conversation, man. That's good stuff, huh? Wow.
Yeah. Really
Who
good.
knew? There was so much to talk about.
There's a lot, dude. 9-part list and a 5-part list in 20, in 60 minutes or fewer. I mean, that's just pretty good. That's packing in the value. You just got to give people a chance to go and listen to it and not let their brains absorb it. But anyway, I know you got to jump on a call in a second, so I guess we can't do our customary hangout for anyone else who's on live with us.
Yeah, no worries. But no, this has been great. So really appreciate everybody hanging out live with us that watches this. And it's always an honor to serve. This episode will be out on our podcast in a couple weeks, so you can always check it out there. And when you do, I'd love to have you subscribe on whatever player of choice you have, Spotify or Apple, whatever it is. We'd love to have you subscribe and or leave a review or a rating or whatever if it's possible. So yeah,
absolutely
awesome. Oh man, I got to jump, but this has been great as always.
Yeah, likewise. Take care. Have a great week.
Soon. Bye.